Imagine having access to a tribe of mentors, experts in the biggest questions in tech. This is Making Revenue Tick. So we've actually just finished recording the episode. So Dustin, for people just joining now, what are they going to hear about in the next 60 minutes or so?
Well, other than a charming, rich voice, I mean, we talked about where companies that are scaling to 20 million, what are some of the big problems that they face, and what are the options on how to dealing with it? When you have chips that you got to allocate across the table, how are you making those trade-offs? And importantly, how are you convincing people that these trade-offs are the right ones? It brings us into a little bit of qualitative versus quantitative. When are we making the mathematically right decision versus when are we making the decision that's right for our people and culture? And then we wrap it up a little bit with some of the executive, where the executive communication challenges and opportunities lie when you're in a senior role with board and CEO stakeholders.
I love it. I think the only thing that I would add to that is this is not just here's what you should do and here's just some generic challenges that you might be able to research on AI. This is lived experience from Dustin's career with a bit of my experience sprinkled in. So enjoy this episode. Let's roll the VT. Hello and welcome to Making Revenue Tick. I am joined by Dustin Clinard. Dustin, how are you doing?
I'm doing great, Rich. How you doing?
I'm very well. We just had like an amazing chat about our fantasy NFL passions and how, as a Brit, I'm sort of like just getting into this. And then we've had a great conversation. Maybe we can lace some of our love of NFL and sports into this podcast.
I was at the first NFL game in London in 2007, 2008, and I love the global reach that it's starting to take. It takes a slightly different brand persona in Europe, but it's I'd love to. Well, let's just make that the theme for everything.
Yeah, I like it. I like it. I've managed to assemble a group of 11 other people in Britain who like NFL, and we've got a fantasy league. So this will be interesting to see which parts of the network sort of light up with this topic. But I know we had like a really good pre-chat about the potential topics that we could talk about. And there's a part of the revenue journey that you're really passionate about, where you've got a load of lived experience. And I know that most LinkedIn content is like, here's how you do this, and here's 10 steps to go and master this thing, and la la la. But I think the real life stories about the growth stage challenges that you've faced and the businesses you've worked at have faced and how you see it in your perspective and what you've learned, I think would be an awesome topic of conversation. So, what's that growth stage that you have the highest amount of lived experience against and you're most passionate about?
Well, most of my roles have been in companies that are trying to get to their first crossover of 20 million or their first crossover of 50 million. The bulk of it has been, say between 3 and 10 or 3 and 20. And I think that stage is fascinating. First of all, there's a lot of opportunity out there. There's a lot of companies that are in that stage. But there's also, you have the problems, you have the number of problems that a larger organization has, but you tackle them in a very different way. The solution versus the communication or all of these things are problems. Which one are we going to focus on? It becomes a much different challenge, I think, in the smaller stage, and that's where I played, and that's where I find it really, really enjoyable and fruitful.
Yeah, for sure. It's exactly the same as my sort of where I position my ICP. We talk about finding entrepreneurial executives for managers and salespeople and executives at early stage tech companies. And it's typically sort of seed through to series B. And what I found is the more I've done this, those challenges absolutely exist in larger companies, because often large companies through acquisition and merger are just a bunch of small companies glued together. All the way they built their business with smaller business units that each carry a P&L all face those sorts of challenges. So I think probably what we're going to talk about in terms of this maybe like 3 to 20 stage will be as relevant for some of those larger companies too, and some of those revenue leaders and entrepreneurs in that stage as well. So definitely let's get into it. What is it about that growth stage that you find most interesting and exciting versus maybe really early, so let's say in the sort of 0 to 3, or so big that it's kind of out of your wheelhouse?
Yeah. I think The way I think about it is it's like the kind of the fundamental problem statement is deconstructing revenue. I think when you get to 5 million, you now have customers. You have customers that fall into a bucket, but then you usually have some that fall into a different bucket. And so you're forced to think about, well, what's our core use case versus we don't want to lose the revenue from these tail customers. When you think of selling, you've sold to a lot of different, you sold to the exact use case to the exact people or companies or ICP you want to, but you've also sold to somebody else. So you've seen this glimpse of like, oh, but we could sell it over here. And then it can spiral out of control really easily because you don't have one problem and one customer type. You have just as many as a big company does, but you should focus back on the core. And focusing back on the core becomes really difficult when you would give up a little bit of revenue if we pivoted away on the customer side, or if we didn't attack this market. Everything looks like a problem. And I would agree with what you said. The bigger companies, these problems exist. At the smaller companies, it's you who has to deal with them all. But a bigger company, you'd have a team of folks that focus on different things. I actually think you get more exposure on the smaller side because you can't avoid them. Um, you can't pass them off to somebody else.
Yeah, and they could kill you
Yes.
if you don't deal with them, right? Because you just don't have the same amount of resource. This could be everything on
Yeah.
solving this challenge.
Well, and you have an active management team and an active board typically that has opinions that come through more frequently or clearer, right? If you're at 10 million, your board has an opinion on this market's better than that market. We should sell for this use case and not that. We should be focusing here and not there. Not that you don't have opinions at a bigger company, but there's more filtering layers in between, right? It's less, it's not coming through your sales directors aren't hearing necessarily like what the board member's opinion was, but when you're smaller, they do because they know each other, they see each other, and it can cause some distraction. This person thinks we should go over here and not there, and you might want to just kind of ignore it and wipe it out, but you can't do that as much at the smaller level. Like you have to address these issues.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. It's not like large companies where they do their annual reports and they're setting really clearly the stall and direction. Then they've got shareholders like expecting that, so they can't really pivot. Or I suppose they're designed not to as much because they want to go after things in a more meaningful way, with assembling all of their resources around it. Whereas startups, you just have to be agile. You have to go after opportunity. You have to, you're going to catch on fire that you weren't expecting because you didn't have enough data to go and predict it in the right way, and then you've got to go and react. So let's break this down in terms of growth stage challenges. So let's talk about, in your experience, what are the top challenges? Maybe we do one by one, that you experience between that kind of 3 and 20 million growth stage.
Yeah. I think one of the big challenges is resource capacity model and allocation. Like the constant fight: do we have enough people? Do we not have enough people? Are they pointed in the direction or are they not? That challenge exists everywhere, but I think it's particularly pointed when you have a team of 5 reps and you could have 10. Right, that's only 5 people. At a bigger company, that's a rounding error, but in a small company, that's double your sales cost. Do we have the capacity to add more people? Like, is that really the right? Like, should we be throwing people at the problem, or are we throwing people at something that's broken? And I think that's one of the fundamental problems that happens constantly. I think the other one of the other big problems is I'll call it like qualitative versus quantitative. Is this a thing that we can mathematically solve with a process, a sales process, a diagnostic, like the way we do our diagnosis or discovery calls? Is there a process thing to this, or are we really relying on passion? Like we need people that are passionate, and the process matters, but maybe they just don't have the right passion. And so that kind of qualitative quantitative piece I've seen come up in most companies, and you get people that want to try to solve it in different ways. And then I think the third thing, if I can have 3, would be the communication, the executive team, board communication, especially. And I had I'll use private equity as an example. It gets really interesting when you have what feels like multiple parents, right? You have a boss that pays you and employs you, yet you have a board that has views that may or may not be aligned. and depending on the role that you're in, like, you hear them all, and you end up, do I listen to mom or do I listen to dad? And what do I do? And how do I communicate and bring those pieces together? And I've probably had my share of mistakes in that category also.
Yeah, well, let's share our same here. So so if we talk about the first thing, which is you got a limited number of chips, I often talk about how a lot of the mistakes that people make in early stage is that when they go to hire, they go, "Oh, this person has operated at this incredible level for one of the giants within our industry." And then they bring them in, and then it's like organ failure because they have been used to having so much resources around them that when they need to be resourceful, they can't just because they've been programmed in a different way. They have different expectations, different skill sets, a different kind of machine. So when we're talking about the resourcefulness that a business needs to have to, effectively leverage the resources that they do, which will be pretty pale in insignificance to some of the competitors they're trying to displace and some of the rivals in their market. What are some of those major challenges that you've lived through, to do with the limited number of chips that you would have at an early stage?
Yeah, I find this story to be funny, whether you or your listeners do, I don't know. But I started in sales. I was an engineer. I was good at math and I like chemistry, and that's how I got into engineering. I did chemical engineering, and what I realized was a lot of chemical engineers, they work for food companies, they work for CPG companies, they build better diapers. I didn't want to do any of that, so I went into hardcore chemicals, and I had 100 people that reported to me when I was probably 25 years old, and I wanted to figure out how to manage them better. So what do you do? Like, I lived in Chicago. Maybe I'll go to management school. So I went to management school to get my MBA, which, like, I thought was management school. And then I got there the first day and I looked at the course curriculum and I thought, this is business. This is not, people management. So I ended up going the business route, which is what moved me into sales. I thought sales would be a short-term thing, and I ended up landing at a company called CEB, the Corporate Executive Board, which was notorious for hiring people that didn't have a sales background. They had a really good training process, but the product that they sold was very simple. You took the product, it didn't change. You sold it to executives all over the world. I mean, great life experience. But what you focused on the personality of the person that you were selling to. You didn't focus on the product. Like, it was the same product for everybody. And what you needed to figure out you needed to figure out how to connect with these people individually. You knew that if you met enough of them, the conversion rates were going to work. So you really tried to blanket the market, connect with them personally, and then you were going to fall in the right conversion rate. And, like, that formula really worked. So that all that is a background to the next role that I had, where I went to work for a company. It's a British company, actually, doing corporate training, training for companies, soft skills training, communication training. And I was on a train with my boss coming back from New York. We were coming to Boston, and we had just had a meeting with one of the big financial services companies in New York. And they gave us a really good problem statement. This is the thing I'm trying to solve. This is what I'd like a solution to look like. Can you do something about that? We said, we'll go ahead. We'll go away. We'll have a think about it and see what we can do. I sat down on the train. He pulled open his laptop and he's like, "Okay, let's build their solution." I said, "What are you talking about? Like, we need to call somebody. It's nighttime in the UK. Like, what are you?" He's like, "No, we'll just build it on our laptops." And this is the first time I had ever, like, we whipped out PowerPoint and we started moving circles around and building the flow and said, "This is now our solution." And I said, "What is this?" We just built a different solution, like, on the train ride. And that was my first exposure to realizing that as a salesperson in smaller companies like this, you have to understand the problem and the solution. And in a lot of cases, you're building it yourself. Graphic design is one thing, but how this thing is going to solve their problem. There was no cavalry coming in to help you. There were no paratroopers that would say, "Oh, we have the right thing for this." I think getting into that the company was probably, the U.S. business was very small. We were under 10 million at the time. Any customer that would buy from us was good, but we were selling big enough deals where we weren't tricking anybody. Like, these had to be real solutions and they had to be customized solutions. And I think that exposed me to this idea that if you have spent your career at a big company with all the resources that you talked about, that pivot into this very small Series A, business where you have to have your own solution. You have to believe it's right. You might even have to convince people internally this is the right solution. That's a very different mindset than selling something that doesn't change, like selling a thing that is. And I think that's affected the way I think about hiring. I think there's a lot of great people at big companies, but you have to know what you're getting into because it is you and a laptop, and half the time you're in a room. Like there's no Cavalry coming to solve your problem. If you can define it well, you can get help. But that mindset, I think, is very different at smaller companies, and it puts a different level of pressure on salespeople. It's also why, if you think of startup days, if 20 years ago, you go to a startup, you take a pay cut, but you get a big equity slug. Now, the startup salespeople are paid very well, but the the pressure and the responsibility that goes with it is also pretty significant compared to years ago.
Interesting. Yeah, there's so many things that I could ask you about there because you're obviously right in my real wheelhouse now. Where do people go wrong? So if we think about, bringing the right people into the business for that growth stage, where do people go wrong?
Well, at the individual level, I think recognizing ownership or not recognizing your ownership over the pieces you're in control of, whether it's the solution or the sales process or the market, not seeing that early enough is a mistake I've seen people make a lot. I'll wait for somebody to tell me where to focus my efforts. I'll wait for somebody to tell me what to sell. I'll wait for somebody to tell me these are the problems we solve for. And it takes too long. You can't wait on that. Like you have to go, even in your interview process, you have to understand that the more you come with the solution to the problem, the more you understand the problem and come with the solution to the problem yourself, the faster you're going to get up to speed. I think at the leadership level, it's looking for the balance between experience and somebody who needs training. And this is where I see there's a split in different companies. Some companies have great training programs. You bring in somebody who's like they have good core fundamental skills, but we can teach you how to sell it our way. Um, that's rare. That's the exception more than businesses that don't have any sort of enablement, but still believe they can bring in somebody and teach them how to sell. And I think if you're honest with yourself, if you have no enablement, if you have no real training, you do need people who can do it from day one on their own. And that's a very different hiring profile and probably a different cost profile than somebody who says, look, I can bring in folks with less experience. And I actually have the mechanism behind the scenes to teach them and to train them. And I think that's overestimated. I don't think many companies have that. And certainly, like when I was in private equity, it's not a training ground. That's not a learning ground. The cycles are too short. Like you need to know what you're doing from day one, like day minus one. And I think getting that wrong is a mistake I've seen. I mean, I've made it. I'm not going to point the finger at other people.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. It's like that classic project management triangle, right? Like the cost, time and risk. Like if you want things done fast, then you're going to have to pay a bit more for it, or else you're exposing yourself to a bunch of risk, and it's going to take a lot longer. So you just have to pay. Like people need to realize that people who already have gone through that learning process at someone else's dime is going to come into your business at a higher rate. And I think a lot of businesses aren't. They're not prepared to train people.
No, and, since we're talking, Series A companies, who exists in the company right now? A lot of the folks that are there now are people that have been there for years. So they were there when the company started smaller. They've grown their way up, and what you're talking about is hiring a profile that looks very different than them. The cost profile could look very different, and you get yourself into some pretty awkward scenarios where you have one person who's been there and done well. They've done well on commissions, financially, they've done well. And now you're gonna bring in somebody else that's paid significantly more, who comes in with the skill set that's needed right now. And navigating that internally, I think is a big challenge. There's several ways you can do it, but that's a hurdle I think that's underappreciated because you will have folks that have been there for 5 years or 6 years. They've done well. They're the trusted hands on the team, but they grew up in that business, and now you're trying to bring in folks that didn't, the outsiders, um, dealing with that.
I was one of those people. I was in a business for 12 years,
Yeah.
and so developed from like what was an SDR up to business unit director. And obviously you reach a point where you just can't find everyone for your leadership team from the internal staff, even though we had a really good development program. So lots of people like me who came in with zero experience managed to progress up to like third line leadership. But when people came in, we didn't always get that right. The actual success rate of hiring external leaders was very poor.
Yeah.
Very poor, in fact. Whereas we were excellent at early stage of bringing people through. In your experience, how have you found what works to bring in people from the outside and then get them integrated in a way that doesn't disrupt the current team?
A couple principles that I'll use. One is everybody who's been there and put in their time, they deserve a shot, right? So where I've seen the mistake made is you helicopter in a leader of whatever function. It kind of doesn't matter. You helicopter in a leader without everybody else, without telling everybody else, or without giving other people a chance to say, "Would you like this role?" And that rubs a lot of people the wrong way. Like, I would like a shot at that. Not everybody who wants a shot at it, though, knows how to do it. And part of it is exposing where I've seen it work well is when you expose what that role is actually responsible for. The level of detail or the level of expertise that you need, the ability to do planning or design a sales process or coach or whatever. If you create some transparency around that, then folks will start to say, I don't have that skill, but I would actually love to be taught by somebody like that. And if you can set that up well, and it's like you give people a chance, but you also show them how hard it's going to be. Then when somebody from the outside comes in, there's this sense of relief. Like, I would like to learn from this person because I've only seen it here. I've never seen it in other places. One of the companies that I was recently at was similar. A lot of folks that had been there for a while. And when somebody came in from the outside, there was this sense of relief. Like, okay, now maybe we're going to get taught by somebody who's seen it work elsewhere. I have a lot to learn, especially if you're earlier in your career. Like, you want the leadership roles faster, but you want to learn. And like, I've seen it done well in that case, but I've also seen it when you ignore those things and just bring somebody in, it creates resentment, creates turnover. People leave. Good people that you wanted to keep will leave as a result.
Is this where we drop in the Aaron Rodgers to the Steelers example?
He is on one of my teams, and I'm hoping he does well. But we could switch to the NFL. We tie it all in.
It's quite funny. I've got one of my best friends is a Steelers fan, and like last year they were like, we got this massive QB room, but like no one's good. And then they bring in Aaron Rodgers, and everyone was like, I mean, if he can stay healthy, and he's organized that team in a fantastic way in such a short period of time. It just made me think that when you bring the right person in, and people are going, well, what could I learn from this person, rather than kind of what's happened in lots of other businesses, like what they were doing before.
Yeah.
You just get the completely wrong example, and not to rain on Russell Wilson too much, but that seems the opposite example. When Russell Wilson goes into a team, I don't think anyone's thinking, wow, we can learn from this guy. It's like, how
Yeah.
long will he last until we replace him with some rookie?
Yeah. You look at, I mean, we continue on the football side. You look at the quarterbacks that have been, in the league and done well at multiple teams. You can't control everything around. Aaron Rodgers can't control everything around him. He can't control injuries, around him, but he has the experience of knowing when to throw it away. He'll limit his interceptions. He knows how to scan for option 1, 2, 3, and like the principles that go into that. I would love to understand them a little bit better, but the mental games that happen in such a short period of time, those are the things that a rookie or somebody who's earlier in the career isn't going to have the experience to do. He might not have the mobility that he had before or strength that he had before or whatever, but the ability to teach the principle or the thought process that goes through it, I think, is the coaching and the mentoring. I mean, you see people that have extended their careers way beyond what you think they should have.
Yeah.
I mean, who knows? Maybe Tom Brady will even come back and play again. But it's less about the mobility and it's more about I've seen this movie many, many times and I've seen the endings, it's a choose your own adventure. And I do have some control over how this thing ends, and that thought process, I think, from that QB level, like that analogy back into business, I've seen where this could go. I've seen what happens if we focus on too much on our partners, or I've seen what happens if we ignore our partners, for example. Like, I've seen this play out. Doesn't mean it's going to play out exactly like that here, but I've seen this movie many times and have some perspective on it that might not exist.
Yeah, for sure. What it makes me think of is everything you've been describing so far really fits nicely into a model that I've realized, the pattern that I've realized and turned into a model, which is what's the core characteristics that make someone an entrepreneur. So a successful leader within a business, or I call them a multiplier. And I've realized it's the core four things, and it spells the word core, which is they're collaborative, they have massive ownership, they're resourceful, and they execute. And the mistake that I see people make, particularly when they're talking about bringing in external talent into a business, is what's your track record of performance? And it's all on quota, it's all on size of team managed, it's all on revenue, it's all about market, it's all about industry. It's like history and achievement. And there's very little on the behavioral lens and the attitudinal lens. And there was some data that I was researching from Sequoia, where it talks about how 89% of mishires, so failed hires, are due to attitudinal and cultural misalignment. So if 9 out of 10 people fail because they've got the wrong attitude and culture for the business, I mean, and because we're indexing just on what they've done before, that's the missing piece. And you've talked about ownership, like they have to have that I take ownership. This is my thing. You're not going to have to like chase me and, ask me what's going on. I take ownership for this problem. They're resourceful, like we've talked about. They obviously execute because we don't just want consultants in the business. We need people to get stuff done. But the collaboration piece is key because great people leverage through others. And what I've seen happen in my experience is that when some external leaders come into a business, like it's all about them delivering a result with like
Yeah.
they're the hero. And it's not
Yeah.
about how can I as a person leverage the resources that we have inside the business to achieve this result. Whether that's leveraging across your team or across departments, or it's leveraging within customers, but you have to be able to get results through people and with people. And I often find that these people just aren't integrated in the recruitment process. There's no like, let's get this person to meet the team. Let's get them to create some commonality. Let's get them to understand the challenges from the perspective of the people that they're going to be working with. They just get, like you say, we've hired this person. They make them look like a hero, whack
Yeah.
them on some sort of slide deck that gets sent out or presented in a company meeting. And then this person comes in like, with this, I have to live up to this expectation. It's not like this person's here because we've got this challenge, we've got this gap, they've got this experience, and here's how they're going to help us, and here's what we can do to help them. And I just wonder what your perspective is on that.
The hero, the hire a hero comment, I think resonates well. I've seen that many times. I may have been expected to be the hero at times, and it's really hard. Like you don't know a lot about the business, you don't know a lot about the people. Where experience helps you, you've seen multiple things play out, and I think what you have to make a decision on a market we're going to go after, or roles that people are in, or promotions you're going to make. I don't know. This game's not it's not that hard. Like there's only so many outcomes that can happen here. But I think the trick is being able to share what the alternatives are. It's a lesson I've learned relatively recently is I have the right answer. I have the right answer because I went through all of the wrong answers and this is the best one for us. But if you don't share the wrong answers and you only share the right answer, you haven't let people see your work. It's like geometry. Like what's the theorem that goes into the answer? That theorem part is really important so that people can see there are trade-offs, and we're choosing one for whatever reason. But here's the bad decisions, or here's what we judge as the suboptimal decisions. You'd think that would open up this big debate over no, no, no. I think these other answers are better. And what most people that I've seen do is, oh, you've actually thought this through. Let's go with this model. And I think back to your collaboration, that's not just you, that's folks on your team, folks on cross-functional teams. Why we're going to make a decision, like you still are coming up with the answer in a lot of cases, but you're doing it by giving people the ability to weigh in. Most people will still hunker down and do their role, but you've shown your work. And I think that showing your work part is a big part of the collaborative effort. Same thing. I mean, you could apply it to hiring. You could apply it to forecasting and planning. You could hire it to apply it to deal execution. But I think that openness. There are alternatives. Every decision has alternatives, and sharing the alternatives. Every once in a while, an alternative will seem better. But I think that's a key to the decision making and the buy-in for it.
I love it. I love it. I remember when we went through this training program to become directors, and we had to where we worked out there were 17 skills that we had to develop to become directors. So we were really good about thinking of this stuff. It's a lot of skills to develop, by the way. But one of them was decision making. And what I realized was what precedes decision making is critical thinking. And we don't really ever get taught critical thinking. So a lot of it is we've gone and failed loads of times. We've seen this play out badly. Here's what we were thinking. Here's what happened. Here's how it changed our view. And if you've gone, I think, like a Sherpa, if you've gone up the mountain and you've realized, when people went that way, we never saw them again. When people went that way, they got really badly injured. That way, we survived. We made it over. And if you can speak to a Sherpa who's been up the mountain and knows the way, they're the kind of person that you can follow. But if they just went, "That's the way, follow me," you just have to listen to me because I'm senior and because I have this authority. People just don't buy into that. And it's this whole sales thing. Like you're getting people to buy into something, and presenting critical thinking and alternatives and involving people in that decision means you get to share that experience with people, because why should everyone have to make the same mistakes that you
Yeah.
have, right?
I had a great experience around COVID, and COVID caused a lot of companies to, rethink things. And I was in a business and we sold OKRs, objectives and key results. We sold OKR software. The whole fundamental premise that was started by the founder was this is an outcome oriented goaling model that can be applied to small teams or it can be applied across a whole company. And if you apply it across a whole company, it starts to look like an alternative to goal setting in the performance management process. So there was always this OKRs are at the core, but it's to help drive better performance. And the pandemic hit, and we said, okay, we need to make a decision because we have a lot of customers that use us for OKRs, product teams, engineering teams, marketing teams. They want to have more meaningful goals and they want to move quickly. But we also have this other set of customers, which is HR, and they think about it as this is a better goal setting model in the performance process. Which direction do we go? And if we looked at our customers by volume, most customers were OKR customers, not performance customers. But we decided let's decide. We kind of can't play in both camps. And the CEO was an ex sales commercial leader. So I think he may have had his answer in mind. But he said we need to split and we need to have two teams. One, go chase the OKR path. One, chase this performance path and come back. And so everybody came back with the reason, pros and cons. And he said that's not really what I meant. What I meant was I need you to think about this from a business perspective. Where are we more likely to win? I need you to look at the addressable market. I need you to look at the folks that we have. And everybody brought their back. I was on the OKR team. And so I argued, look, there's a consultants that focus on OKRs. There's a whole, this is where most of our customers are. We wrote a book on this topic. This is where we should go. But if you looked at the addressable market, the success rate was in the hundreds of millions of dollars. That was how much we could possibly sell. That was our TAM. Then you go the other route and you say, what's the performance model look like? The TAM is in the billions. You have a different set of competitors. It is the bigger enterprise sale. We were VC backed, and so they weren't going for small outcomes. They were going for big outcomes. And kind of the final straw was when you looked at the people we had at the company at the time and what their backgrounds were. More people had some sort of HR background than had this kind of operational efficiency background. And put all those together transparently, we need to make a choice, like road A, road B. We're going road B, and we're going on performance. And so that pivoted everything for us. Marketing, sales, we had legacy customers we had to figure out. It was kind of like a land and expand. It was really hard to land and then expand from a totally different category. But it rallied everybody around what the cause was, because I think we created transparency about what the options were. And the diligence into the options weren't just we had A or B and we chose B. It was we spent a lot of time figuring out why A is not going to be optimal as an outcome for all of us. In a venture-backed business, everybody's got options. You want the options to be, you want to make money in the process, but you want your options to be worth something. And I think that transparency allowed the buy-in to happen much faster than it would have been otherwise. And that's a company pivot. That is recognizing that your core, what you've been doing for years, might not be the right thing to keep going. But you're not gonna, but you still have a fundamental product that needs to apply in a different case. So there are constraints. But I found that to be one of the more fascinating business experiences I've ever been through.
I love that. I wonder if that's the sort of stuff that might get short circuited by AI. Because, with AI, which has been trained on all of this stuff and all the books that you could imagine, when people say, I want to go and do this, it kind of spits out the answer without that working through different options or creating a scenario where you deliberately got people trying to go and solve the problem. So they went and found the answers and they got buy-in. And AI agrees with us, right? So like one of my pet peeves, and people go, well, you can train it not to agree with you, but it will find different ways to agree with me because the software is designed that I love it, tell everyone it's amazing and use it every day. So it's not going to become challenging in the same way that a great leader is challenging and asks you really good questions and makes you think of things that were blind spots for you. You couldn't ever prompt it because it's just not even in your brain. And I just wonder if you have a perspective on the importance of this type of creation of collaboration and trying to solve problems with people when technology is just trying to go, here's the answer, it's all done for you, it's cleverer than you, just follow what it says.
It's really interesting because I think back to what this before LLMs. So how would we have approached this if we had LLMs? We probably could have gotten a lot deeper, a lot quicker. Um, uh, but you would get an objective. Here's the pros of road A, and here's the pros of road B, and economically, road B outweighs road A, and so we should go with road B. Like you probably would have gotten a similar answer. What you may not have gotten is the buy-in from the people, the culture of the folks that we had, why this decision was actually better for the folks that we had, as opposed to simply the business outcome. I think you'd had a hard time selling it. You may come to the answer faster. What I think AI is doing is AI is giving us answers quicker, but the challenge in a lot of businesses is not getting the right answer. It's getting people to rally around the answer. And you wouldn't have had the belief and you wouldn't have had the buy-in, or you're less likely to have that if we had gone the similar problem right now. I agree with you. I mean, I use AI every day, but I use it to try to figure out almost a depth that I wouldn't have otherwise come to as quickly. Like, what am I missing? What else should I consider? And then, there are implications, competitive implications that I hadn't thought about. But then I can decide, should I think about them or not? Rather than I need you to think through these for me. And I think the experience and leadership there is really going to help, because ultimately your culture and your people buying into whatever decision you're trying to make is going to be the thing that leads to success or failure. Even though one of the answers may be superior to the other, I wouldn't let I wouldn't let it swing me back to the wrong answer. It's rather, we're not ready to go with the right answer until we get the level of buy-in that we need from the folks that we have.
Without that experience, though, you just don't have the wisdom to know, if it's telling you stuff that's not good, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Like I realized that if there's things that I'm researching in AI that I just don't have the context around, I'll just go and do it. Like, I told you I've got an AI trade analyzer on my NFL fantasy.
Yeah.
And I don't know that much about NFL. So but I know that if it tells me that one player's still at an old team, I'm like, that's wrong. But if you don't have that, like, I know in reality how this should look, the chance that you're going to go down this, absolute rabbit holes and burn runway, particularly at an early stage when you have limited resources, is so high. So I think it really lends itself to what's the experience of the importance of bringing in some experience into the business to help you to decide what not to do.
Yeah.
Because we
It-
all know like what to do. We know how to lose weight. We know how to get fit. We know how to make some more money, but very few people do. And it's the gap between knowledge and like results it's not a lack of knowledge, right?
yeah. If your AI is telling you to drop Derrick Henry and pick up Aaron Rodgers, you need to add a little of your own wisdom on top. You can call me if you want to talk that through.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I'm still using GPT-3 and it's like we were trained on 2012. Yeah, exactly.
I'm
Exactly.
also 1 and 2 in 2 of my leagues, so maybe don't call me, call somebody else.
Okay. I like it. So this it lends itself nicely in terms of what we're talking about with like this whole knowledge and AI into this whole quantitative versus qualitative. So can we like dig a bit deeper into that topic? Why is that so important?
I think if I look at um, a lot of the problems that we're facing, like should we throw more reps at a market, as an example? The math on that is actually harder, I think, than people think, because to do the math on that, you need to understand the not only like historical conversion rates, but what happens to conversion rates if the thing you're looking at changes. So if I give you 1,000 accounts and your conversion rate of getting meetings with them is like 2% or 3%, you could easily do the math and go, well, I would need 10,000 accounts in order for me to get 300 meetings over the course of a year, whatever. If we reframe it and said, well, if I give you 100 accounts and said your job is to get meetings only with these 100 accounts, your conversion rate in getting meetings, I'm just talking about getting some intro with them, is probably going to go up to 30 or 40%. It's gonna be an order of magnitude different than what you've experienced in the past. But the buy-in to get that level, the explanation for how that happens, what would we do different if we are staring at a list of 1,000 versus staring at a list of 100, that's the part that's the change management part. That's the qualitative part. Do people believe in this? And I've done this thing probably 3 or 4 times where people say, I don't have enough leads. The market's not big enough. And then if you look at the mechanism, it's marketing, it's downloads, it's inbound, it's some level of outbound that typically goes really poorly. And then you shrink the focal point. You shrink the point of view for people to write down and say, all of these companies have a problem we're trying to solve. What we don't know is which leaders are going to be willing to connect with us, which companies are in the market for it right now. But we know that there's enough here and those are the right companies you want to meet with. And you shrink that down, help people see how the math works out in that scenario. And all of a sudden you start to get the buy-in qualitatively more than just quantitatively. I think that can be applied in a lot of different scenarios across revenue functions where there's a logical conclusion, but the buy-in part is the part that you overlook a lot. Or in some cases you spend too much time trying to convince people without showing them the math on it. You haven't shown them how it works. You haven't detailed out like this is the model or this is the plan, and then you can debate it from there. But I think that's probably at the heart of most of the problems that are in need of solving.
Is there a specific example that comes to mind where you've felt that challenge or you've experienced that exact challenge?
Mm, uh, Probably take an example like business I was at. We knew we needed to grow our headcount. The board knew we needed to grow headcount, but we had to make a choice between kind of the green field. Do we grow sales headcount and attack the market? Or do we look at the customer white space and say, what haven't we sold to customers? Where is their upsell or cross-sell opportunity? And when you do the math on those two things, the way we were doing the math, it was leaning towards upsell and cross-sell. Like this is where we're going to get most of our money. We know the customers, we know how much they haven't bought. If we attack that, there's much more revenue potential compared to the conversion rates that we're getting out in the open market. In fact, maybe we need less salespeople so that they can concentrate the leads across a smaller number of people. We can get their ARR, their annual ARR up higher. So we'd have happier salespeople. We'd have less kind of mess to deal with on the sales front. So that was one way to look at it. The other way to look at it was, have we actually considered the fit, qualitatively, where is the fit in our customer base for the things that we want? We were selling 2 different types of products. The land and expand hadn't historically worked well because we'd land in legal and then we try to expand into finance. And in a lot of businesses, legal and finance can argue with each other. And so if you think about the math on the land and expand, yes, there was a lot of white space there, but the hurdle to go legal to finance was almost like reselling. And so your upsells were $10,000. So we're going to upsell $10,000 with the effort that it takes to sell. Essentially, the effort you weren't leveraging a lot of your customer. The fact that they were a customer didn't help you as much as you thought they would, as opposed to the same effort on the sales side, where the greenfield opportunities that we were going after, similar amount of effort, were $60,000-$70,000. And so when you put those together, what you could see was we couldn't ignore our customers, but the right answer was focusing on sales. And as soon as we modeled that all out and everybody started to see it, that helped us communicate why we're going to double the size of the sales team. And we ended up doubling the sales team, and everybody had as much success as they had before, probably more, because as we doubled the sales team, we added tools and we added processes. So the folks that were there were actually more successful than they were before. And you try to expand the view of the market on that side. You could have easily gone the other way. Like the answer could have easily been, let's double down on the customer side. I mean, honest. I won't know what happens because we didn't do it that way. But so maybe there are two answers here, but the rally behind, like, nobody disagreed with the decision, and the rally behind why, and the transparency over the why, I think was the part that allowed us to be the most successful. Oh,
I
at
think it's
all levels, right? Board level, leadership level, and individual level.
yeah. I think it says a lot that you go, "Well, I'm curious to know what would have happened if that was the case," rather than going, "I regret the decision that we made." So you obviously did the right choice.
There's a lot of paths to success, I think. I mean,
Yeah.
back to the point you made earlier, that I think this is maybe a fundamental belief, but there are a lot of ways to be successful. There's a lot of ways to get to the outcome you want. And in a business, it's, once you cross $2-3 million, like, now it is, the first bit could be a little bit of heroism. It's like one person, two people doing great stuff. Like, you can get to that first level. But once you get past that, it does require the team. As soon as you hang up the weekly Zoom call with the team, what do? They all start calling each other. Like, this is a dumb idea. This is a great idea. Like, I believe in this, and you get all the chatter that happens that you never see. And I think that's where the belief system, like, it starts to help you excel at the outcome, at the path that you've chosen, even though there may be other paths that could be successful.
It makes me think about the customer's perspective because it's like, we're talking about like a lot getting buy-in from people, this whole change management piece of leadership and how that's so important if you're trying to move everyone's focus so they can be resourceful around this specific challenge. But it's the same with customers, right? The whole dark funnel, not even just customers, the market. So if you start doing random things from a marketing perspective that aren't particularly well thought through, do alienate certain people, make you look like you are inconsistent and people don't really understand what you're talking about. You might never ever see that in a dashboard, but it will be like this whole like, what are they like? Or they were talking about this last week. I just don't trust them, or I just don't get what they're all about, or they just don't look professional, or whatever that looks like. And I just wonder if you have any perspective on the outward, maybe stuff that doesn't show up in dashboards,
Yeah.
but the consequence on the market and on your potential to attack that market if you don't have that laser focus to go and to do something properly.
We had, this may sound a little counterintuitive, but we ended up, looking at our customer dashboards, and we would look at things like who's called us and who have we resolved problems for, and who's meeting with us weekly versus not. And what we finally recognized was the folks that were in our green, yellow, red status. The folks that were green were potentially the most at risk for us. Those were the folks that didn't complain about anything. They didn't ask us much. They didn't say something was wrong. And then every once in a while, they would just disappear. They would just churn. And what you started to recognize was green is actually a bigger risk than we think it is. And the whole goal is not to get people into green. The goal is to get to get customers to an understanding where you have some level of frequent engagement with them. Now, this is a business that was, say, $50,000 to $100,000 ACV, so it's meaningful enough where you could have touch points with them. Not having too many, but not looking past the green customers. If you think of, so getting the level of engagement with, they didn't need to have, not all of them needed us weekly, right? But finding a cadence that worked with every customer so that you could understand their current level of sentiment, their current level of usage, any competitors that they might bring up or think about, and then attacking those early. Like, I heard him say this on the last call, like, don't leave that nugget. That's a really valuable nugget. Helps you sort out the greens, like green and bright green. I don't know, different greens. But thinking about, like, we know what's going on there, and they're truly green, and we understand why, as opposed to they're green because they haven't had a problem. That was a realization for us. We knew the reds, like, we knew what was red, we knew what was wrong with the red, we knew how to attack the red, but I think the green was the part that we overlooked. And in some cases, we paid for it until we recognized, what was really going on.
It makes me think of the bow tie, right? Moving from this kind of like classic sales funnel view, which is now they're our customers, amazing, job done. We now just focus on the renewal. And if you've got reps, let's say CSMs or account managers who've got loads of accounts, maybe like 300 accounts, it's like you hear that all the time. And
Yeah.
people think they can do more with AI now.
Yeah.
And it's well, they only really start speaking to customers at the renewal date, and then they try and do cross sell, upsell. But what we've been talking about is if you have less accounts, So let's say that we're moving up market, we're going into enterprise. We don't want you to have 300 accounts. We want you to have 20 or 50
Yeah.
that you really intimately know, and that we're being, we're provoking them with poking the bear and presenting different options and bringing them insights and really understanding them and building, proper relationships. Maybe we're taking them out for dinner and golf or whatever, to a ball game. And I think that just that switch of mentality is quite hard for people, because so many people are used to having volume as like a bit of a safety net. So if
Yeah.
you get, 10% churn, that might be 30 accounts, but it's only 10% and that's okay,
Yeah.
you know?
Yeah.
I just wonder what your view is on that.
We so it's maybe a little bit counterintuitive, but I was in a business where the account executives were responsible for new logo acquisition and churn mitigation and cross sell and upsell. So you had a full cycle AE. Everybody said they spent most of their time selling and they only dealt with the customers when they needed to. And the reality was the customers needed to be dealt with a lot. And so there wasn't a lot of selling. So we split those apart. Now, back to the point we made earlier, we looked at the folks that were in these AE roles and said, we're going to split this team. Here's why. You're either going to be a new logo hunter or you're going to be working on the commercial side for customers. But you get to choose. Which one would you like? Now, there was a little bit of like, we saw some people that wanted to go one way or the other. Most people picked the new logo side, which was not a surprise. It tells you that's their mentality, is acquiring things, and they were dealing with customers. But the folks that went to the customer side were very commercially oriented, and they wanted to spend all their time working with customers. So that was the big thing, like create some transparency, let people choose, try not to let them make terrible decisions. But what we saw, though, what we dealt with before was a reactive, hundreds of accounts per person, and an account executive would get involved when needed, and a CSM team whose job was to do the like less than 10%, like don't lose less than 10% of these. But it was very reactive. And we took the account manager role and put them on the account, smaller 50, 60 accounts per person. We said your primary job is to sell more to these customers. And here's where I think it gets a little counterintuitive. If your primary job is to sell more to 50 or 60 customers, you spend all day thinking about what do they have? What do they need? Why do they need that? How do I convince somebody they need that? And as you go have those discussions, I'm here to understand if everything's okay and try to convince you to buy these other things. You get more engaged with where they are right now, with what they have right now. So even if your cross sell upsell isn't killing it, isn't, knocking it out of the park, you are now understanding and see you have an early warning system in place that you can see what's going on with the customer more than the CS team reacting to them would have had. And so those two layers, it's a little bit more expensive, but if you think about it, if, our volume of customers was a few extra headcount, right? It's a few extra headcount. And if you take a few extra headcount and you take off 2%, I think we were aiming for 4% less on churn. That's massive. As soon as we were big enough where a reduction in churn like that was worth a couple million to us. And so the math works out really well. But it's the counterintuitive piece is like trying to sell more to the customer gives you a better understanding of where they are and actually reduces churn at the same time. And that model luckily worked really well. We ended up like our European customers didn't churn at all. And we were trying to sell to them constantly.
Interesting. Is there an NFL example, an analogy we can tie into that?
I don't know for a Dolphins fan, as I can see your helmet in the background. I don't know if
Hey.
there's a lot we can do to help you, but
Basically, I was asking for tips so I can just phone Mike McDaniel and try and save his career. Okay. So
I
the
was
last.
at the first NFL game in London, which the Dolphins played in, to an exciting 13-10 result. And I thought most of it was at Wembley, and half the fans were American and half weren't. And the fans that weren't, I thought were going to just get up and leave. Like, what is this NFL? This is so boring. That took 3 hours.
Yeah, yeah, I
It's
reckon.
gotten more exciting since then.
Yeah, for sure. I think a lot of British people are Miami Dolphins fans because of Ace Ventura: Pet Detective.
I
I
love
think
it.
that's the reason why we still just like go, is Dan Marino going to come and save the day? But I don't know. And then when I went to Miami, I realized it's all about Don Shula and his
Yeah.
steakhouses.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
Amazing. So the last of those three sort of core challenges that we're talking about is the communication side, particularly if we're talking about the investors. So let's double click on that. Why is that one of your core three things?
Yeah, I think, and this is one where I do not claim to have gotten this right. My background probably lends me into problem solving and getting the team rallied behind what we're doing. And I've had this probably mistaken thought that the executive team and the board, they'll just figure it out. Like they'll understand what we're trying to do. They'll go with it. And I found myself in a couple scenarios where, yeah, I report to the CEO, but the board I'm talking to the board also. And what do you do when the board hints something needs to be fixed, right? Something you should do, a change you should make, but the CEO doesn't see it that way. And my default in the past has been, well, the CEO is the one who's actually going to fire me. I have a lot of problems to solve. Like, this is not the only one. There's a lot of things to do. We can table that. Let's go tackle problem number 2 and problem number 3. The board meetings end up being, how is sales doing and how is churn doing, and what are our expansion plans? And the mistake that I've made has been not stopping that conversation and saying, can we put another agenda item in place, which is the thing we've been talking, the thing the board's been asking me about, and the thing I've talked to the CEO about separately. Can we come together as a group and talk about what we're trying to accomplish here? And I think I've failed to connect the dots on those things, recognizing that, thinking this is a me and the CEO problem, me and the board problem, and really this is all of us agreeing what we're going to do and when we're going to do it. I don't think there was a disagreement about what we're trying to do, but there was disagreement on when. Board wanted now, CEO wanted later, and you think, okay, we need to put those together. And there's no right answer to this, but the thing that I missed was, if we don't talk about it now and get an agreement on it now, it's going to come back to look like inaction. And I think as a CRO, maybe the worst thing that you can do is look like you're not taking action. Even if taking action is deciding now's not the time to solve that thing, you're creating transparency and proactively identifying the need to take action. Lessons learned. I learned that lesson, and it won't happen again. But I think that communication, that 3-way communication, isn't happening as much as I thought it was internally. That was one of the key learning pieces for me.
Yeah, I guess you just don't want to get like caught short, right, and caught out, blindsided. Which is where if the board ask a question and you go, I just don't know, that's really bad, right? Whereas if you go, yes, we've considered that, here's why we're not doing it, and here's what we're focusing on, it's much more in control, particularly if you can proactively communicate that. So when you go in, that's not the conversation, and people know why it's not the conversation. So that, like, deleting this, the noise from the signal that we're trying to focus on, because you could look at a dashboard in any number of ways and measure as many KPIs as you possibly wanted to. But often there's like, if you just did this one thing really well, then all these other things that we keep talking about would go away, or at least we'd know why they're happening. So we have to try and get like some progress or some clarity on this specific point, because it's kind of like the foundation of which all the rest of this like nonsense and noise that we're hearing constantly gets talked about. And I guess an example there would be something like the ICP. Are we way too broad with our ICP? We're trying to go after all these different customers, trying to keep them all happy. We're trying to retain them all. We're trying to grow them all. But what we've realized is, in this part of the market, our average order value is 3 times higher. We close deals faster. It's more profitable. The team like it more. Whereas in this market, whilst they might look like they're important clients for us, we lose money on them, and the team hate working on those accounts. And I just wonder if there's like an example that comes to mind where you've seen this problem materialize more than others.
I mean, if you think about it from a board perspective, they don't have the same insight into the business that you do. And one of the mistakes I've made, and I think an easy one to do, is you dig into details that nobody really needs to see. And as soon as we started putting pie charts with our details, it all of a sudden made a lot more sense to the board. What the things that they care about is, do you have the right leadership team around you? Do you have a method for capturing as much of the sales TAM, as much of the sales market as you can right now? And do you understand what's going on in the customer base? All 3 of those things are, you could spend all of your time on all 3 of those things. Being able to segment your board meetings into those 3 things and hit the highlights, right? What you just said, if we did this and we ignore all these other things, the world's going to be great. This is where I think the devil may be in the details, in terms of how believable, how much does it look like you, in that case, are focusing on the thing that matters and saying, we solved the thing that matters and other things are going to work itself out, versus coming across as I'm ignoring all these other things and I'm trying to redirect you. Like, look at this hand and don't worry about this hand. The answer may be the same. The thing you're trying to do may be the same. But I think it comes down to what you said, which is, so when they ask a question, have you already thought that through? Even if it's not in the presentation, even if it's not something you're bringing up. Oh, yes, we know we're more successful in this segment than in that segment. But we know that, and I can get you the data on that. But if we do this one thing, that's going to have the biggest impact for us. And I think if you can do it like that, your believability credentials go up significantly, and it doesn't look like a look, look over here and not over here type of thing. And I think I've had areas where that's worked with almost too much detail, and then areas where I've left off the detail, tried to focus on the big thing, but because the level of detail wasn't there in the appendix or in the pre-work or whatever it happens to be, it's like, yeah, is he trying to pull one over on us? Is that what's going on? And I think getting that balance right is not easy, right? But I think it's an important one, even though the conclusion you're trying to draw might be the same.
So what that makes my mind jump to is if you come into a business, let's say as a CRO, and that business is, let's say, a Series A business at 10 million ARR, and they want to get to 20 million ARR. You, through that recruitment process, have learned a bunch of stuff about the business from various people that you've spoken to, but you don't have the context. You've just seen dashboards and heard a couple of people's perspective and perception of what's happened. And then you get into the business and then you start to realize, whoa, there's so many things here that weren't as advertised, or I didn't dig into well enough, whatever the reason is. I now know a load more than I did before I took the role. And now I've got to manage people's expectations because we can't possibly try and tackle all of this at once, even though it's way more complicated than let's say 180-day plan that I had to present, where we talked about what the core focus was going to be in the first 90 days. I just wonder if you have got any lessons and perspectives and experience that you could share around when you go into a business and you find out a load more stuff than you knew, how you can effectively make the company understand that, rather than we've already talked about the team, so that's less important, but
Yeah.
how can you as a leader help the company to get through this problem that they're stuck in and then actually move on to where they're trying to get to?
Yeah. I have several lessons there. I'll use why I hate to keep coming back to this, but I think the timing and speed of the business, how fast we're trying to grow, and under what expectations do we have, is a key part. I was at a business that was trying to grow 40%. They've grown some years 30, high 30s, some years in the 20s. They had a bad year in the teens, but 40% was kind of the growth target. And it was really easy for people to go, that's not what we've historically done. We're not gonna, you're a pretty audacious guy coming in here brand new to a business and saying we can do something like that. Being able to model it out and convince people that the model has validity to it, but there's constraints on that model. Constraints might be people we need to hire and when we need to hire them by. Constraints might be the way that we're aligning marketing with different segments of the business. But if we do those things reasonably and quickly, this is not an unrealistic target. That's not hopeful. It's logical, but you have to believe in it. Like, you have to believe that we can do this. And worst case, maybe we fall a little bit short, but it'll be better than we've done before. I've had cases where I didn't realize that until I walked into the business. In a recent one, I walked in and did not realize the team and the board had very different expectations for the hiring plans. They were buried in think about it like a due diligence document on slide 72. And you'd actually have to go through it all to see. But somehow in the board's mind, that was what we expected you to do. It wasn't part of the DNA regularly on an operating standpoint. And as soon as you start to recognize that, you're like, wait a minute, there's actually a nugget here that is part of a board expectation that if we map out, we can achieve. I know it sounds like a little bit of gibberish and I'm talking in generalizations, but to some degree, like, that belief in how we're going to get there and what's important. Like, I think maybe this is a point we haven't touched on yet, Rich, and I think it's a matter. A lot of these decisions have A, B, C. They can all be right, right? They can all be right. You can map them all out. You can say, look, I see a path in all of these. What do we want to do? Like, what is the CEO? Is the CEO the founder, like the product founder? Is the CEO a formal commercial leader? Is this a third-time CEO, which you don't tend to get in some of the smaller companies? But where is their passion, and where are they going to say we're rallying behind this together when you do your daily stand-ups, versus this is an interesting idea you had. I'll let you run with it until until you hang yourself. Luckily, I've never had that scenario. Um, but I think that level of trying to figure out what the problem is, and then kind of bringing together the perspectives from the board, and saying, are we on the right? Is this what we think? And I did that one time, and the answer I got from the board was, I'm surprised it took you so long to figure out that's what we wanted. And I was like, it's on slide 72. Took me a while.
Yeah, yeah. Well, you were just out of curiosity in that scenario, were you replacing someone who'd failed against their expectations?
Sort of. Yeah, it's complicated. It was a new role, so I wasn't replacing the role.
Yeah.
They were adding the role to sort this out.
Yeah.
So
Coming back to something you said right at the start, which is, like people take ownership during the recruitment process. I was listening to a podcast the other day from Dan Sullivan, who's one of my heroes, strategic coach, entrepreneur coach. And he was talking about how in recruitment, he sees it very simply that the candidate is the seller and the business is the buyer, and how he plays a certain role and teaches his people to play a certain role, which is they are the buyer. And I love Dan Sullivan. I love him. Everything he says, like there's a level of wisdom there that I can only aspire to. But I was going, I just don't feel it's that black and white. And he teaches people to be like really like poker face, so you can't read it during the process. And I'm going, no, this is two-way. This is two-way. You're selling and you're buying, both sides. It's one of the most interesting processes I think it exists in business, because you're not just bringing someone in like a new deal to close and then grow. Like this is a person making a decision about their own career. So what I find is businesses act one of two ways, and I think that it can cause a really big problem either, which is one is they go, we are the buyer. This is our recruitment process. You have to go through these steps.
Yeah.
And you have to convince us that you should join our business. And they don't do any selling at all. Straight away, it's vetting, qualification, competition, and win a place. And the other one is people really oversell. So they're like, yeah, this is amazing. We're going to be like, this massive unicorn. It's so exciting. The product's amazing. We've got all these amazing logos. And then you walk in, you're like, wow. Of those like 10 amazing customers that you mentioned, 6 have served notice. The team's in disarray. You've got dysfunction all over the place. Your profitability's through the floor, and you've got like 2 weeks runway, and you're expecting some sort of miracle. So there's like, maybe I'm touching on some nerves, but I just genuinely think that both sides have to be just so open and honest. And there's the whole like discovery piece that has to happen in recruitment that I just don't think really happens, where we go, here are the challenges that we're facing as a business. Here's where we're trying to go. Here's what we don't know. Here's what we figured out already. Here's what we've tried. Here's like what we need in terms of support, but we don't know how. Like, here's where we're trying to go. You are the who knows the how. So this is something that Dan Sullivan says, and I totally agree. We want to find who's who know the how.
Yeah.
Because we don't know. And then for the person coming in, it's like, look, I've made these mistakes. I've got this experience. There's some things that I don't know. Here's some things that I do need to know. And the more the process is a collaborative process about solving growth stage challenges, like this whole topic of this conversation, the more I think we get the match right, and we get people coming in, eyes wide open, expectations aligned, and they can actually build and grow. Whereas often what happens is someone comes into the business and it's like, bam, you're in. Now here's the reality. And people are like, whoa.
yeah,
I can't possibly do this. Or the expectation on that person is just so wildly out that some people sign up for like CRO gigs and then go, I could never shift the expectations. It was just like I was flogging a dead horse from the start. I just wonder, is that triggering anything for you?
it's true. Something's in my eye, Rich. I'm not responding that emotionally to what you're saying. But the funny thing is I hear you say that you're talking about recruiting, And I was also thinking everything he's saying applies to sales. And this is where, if I tie it back to AI, this is where I think AI can really help us. I've been in scenarios where you're going in as a candidate to a business to get a job, or you're going in and trying to sell something to a company. So I look at those two things and I think these are actually very similar. You can go in and ask a bunch of discovery questions and what are you looking for and how do you need? Oh, I can do that. I can do that. Or you can go in with your own hypothesis and say, I've come up with some things that I think these appear to be facts. Like, tell me if I'm wrong, but I think these are facts. And there's some things that I don't know that I had to assume. I have to assume your ACV is here. I have to assume that this is the type of stuff happening in your business. Again, like recruitment and sales. And if I'm wrong, please tell me, but I've made some assumptions. And if they're materially off, like I need to know. Uh, am I getting closer to what you think the problem is? And as I go through that, am I convincing you that I have a handle enough to be able to come in and solve it? And I think there's a level, if I break it down into like the two traits that are important both for recruiting and for sales, it's a level of curiosity and it's a level of intelligence or like dynamic intelligence. I'm dealing with all these different things. I'm trying to put the pieces together. Have I solved, like, is this actually the problem that you have? Because I do have a solution for it. But if it's not the problem you have, I don't have a solution. And in sales, I mean, I realize it's AEs coming in are, trying to hit a quota. Like that part's pretty clear. But how am I going to do it and what's gone wrong in the past and where I think, how would I approach it? I think I think you can use AI to frame that up for you, like use it to build a couple slides, make that easy, but it forces you to go through that thought process on how you sell what I'm going to do. Because they may not, like on the recruitment side, they may not be looking for somebody to come in and do something different at an AE level. We just need somebody to come in and do more or do better. That at the CRO level, there's usually, and this is the question I'll ask, what big problem, like what project am I trying to solve? Because you're not hiring somebody to come in here and just maintain the status quo. Like that's a pretty inefficient maintaining the status quo. But I think I've done my diligence and I think I know what problem you're trying to solve. Is it close? And more often than not, if you've actually thought it through, you're close. You're either right or you're close. And that also, as a candidate, tells you, do I want to solve that problem? Like, is it the kind of business I want to be in? Like, is it all geared towards the sales side? Is it all geared towards the customer side? Is it all geared towards internal effed up operations? Like, which one of those things do I think it is? Does it match with what they think they're hiring for? And in terms of recruiting conversation into a or the sales conversation into a problem solving conversation, like, are we aligned on the problem? And once you're aligned on the problem, I think people will generally believe you have the solution if you're smart enough to get to the core problem. Anyway, I like paralleling the recruiting and the sales
I
side because I think
I
they're so
love it.
similar.
So is that based on the challenger sale, or are you using a different? Where's that context that's giving you that perspective come from?
I grew up in CEB before the Challenger sale. They were figuring out the Challenger sale, so that was part of the business and it spun out. But I was lucky enough to be around a bunch of leaders that were developing and a bunch of people that were testing. And I worked for a guy he was kind of one of the core salespeople that was selling that model, but before it was even a model. I don't necessarily subscribe to one specific model or framework more than others, but I do think your buyers being recruiters or companies that are hiring and buyers being customers you're trying to sell to, like they have a focus and they have a window that they spend their time on. And what you're trying to do is you're trying to get in there and understand that window really quickly. It's 100% of what they spend their time on, but also expand their window to something else. Like, hey, have we thought about these other things? Are there other things out there? Is this really context? And it could be, in discovery, it could be simple. Like, I understand your problem. Why are you trying to solve that problem? Because I imagine there's other, like, why this one and not these? And in a sales process, that can really, like, well, this is the one you're talking to me about. That's why I'm trying to solve it. But I actually have bigger problems over here. It will either help you pivot to the bigger problems or realize your deal's a shit deal and it's not likely. Even though you have the right answer for their problem just isn't important enough. And I think there's elements of the Challenger sale that go into that. I believe in the teach, tailor, take control. So like you have to come and teach somebody something, and there's a bunch of different ways you can teach it internally, teach it externally, teach a competitor, teach product, whatever. You can endless number of things that you can attempt to teach. Um, and if you follow a model like that, I think you're generally okay.
I love it. I love it. So just closing this out then, if someone wanted to talk to you about their growth stage challenges, or maybe it's another leader who's going into a situation and just wanted to get your perspective on it, what would be the best way for them to get hold of you be?
I'm probably all over the internet with my phone number, but LinkedIn is the easiest. I'm in Boston. I'm just outside of Boston, so East Coast US. And yeah, I love these. I think the challenges that repeat themselves so frequently in smaller businesses, a lot of them that we touched on today, if you're anywhere sub 20 million, let's say, maybe with the exception of a 0 to 1, which is a slightly different motion, I think a lot of these things are going to repeat themselves in one way or the other, and probably all of them at the same time. So it's it's fun. From my background, I don't know if you look, but my background, I've been in different industries, I've worked in different countries, and I've been in different functions. And I think that to me, and I don't want to repeat the same thing over and over again. I don't. I did this before, and I want to do exactly the same thing next. I don't think I don't think that's what drives you need to go into something knowing you don't know something. That's what spurs the learning, and I think that's a critical thing. So anybody who wants to talk about anything in that realm, I'm more than happy to.
Amazing. What would be a final thought that you'd want to leave people with who've listened to us, having us come? No. What would be a final message that you want to leave people with who've been listening to this conversation today?
I think it's the last thing we touched on, but I think the communication piece is the part that I overlooked. I tried to come up with the right answer. I have an engineering background, so figuring things out is really important. And I left the communication part till a little bit too late. I don't think you can ignore the first piece, but the way you think about communicating transparently, somebody asks you to do something, why this and not that? Those, if you're a leader, if you're a CEO of a business and you're asking your team to go do these things, and if they come back and say, happy to do those things, why this and not that? You're not going to you enjoy that conversation. And I think a lot of people are afraid to have it. And I've been in points where I've been afraid to have it. Why this? Why are we focusing on this and not here? But I've gone the path of like, okay, boss, I'll do what you say. And I think opening up that line of communication in a curious way is probably that's the biggest takeaway. Like, don't hesitate to communicate or to talk outside of the formal, like you still have to do the thing you have to do, but understand the why during the communication, I think matters as more than anything.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Dustin, thank you so much for your time. You've been an absolute gent.
Awesome, Rich. I really loved it.
Good man. Everyone
Go
else will
Dolphins.
see. Yeah, yeah. Stop. The Lions. I wonder if the Lions are going to win this year. Let's see.
I think the Lions might do. I think the Lions might do great. When people figure out what my shirt means, though, Rich, when somebody figures out I don't know what your audience looks like, but if you have an audience in Ohio, you may lose some of your Ohio audience. I'll just leave it at that. And I apologize in advance.
They tuned out a long time ago. We're just left with the sort of diehard Michigan fans now.
Really nice to talk to you, Rich.
Yeah, absolute pleasure. Everyone else will see you on the next episode. Thank you for listening. And if you enjoyed this conversation, we've got a newsletter called Growth Magnet on LinkedIn, where we take the best insights from all of these episodes and turn them into bite-sized format for you to enjoy.